Hello, everyone. So today we are going to talk about labor, socialism, and anarchism. We are going to be looking at kind of the responses to the Second Industrial Revolution, some changes, what's going on with workers, and some, I guess, the increase in size of socialism, if you will. So let's get right into it. Okay, so labor is going to expand. Unions will grow each and every year with more people getting involved in them. Many unions will also then start to work or even form political parties. This was actually kind of one of the biggest inspirations of Marx. Okay, and so even though not many nations, especially in the 1800s, won't become communist, if you will, but the idea of kind of using Marxism within the political process is going to be pretty crucial. And in general, like we've often said with unions and union groups before, and even these political parties, is to address the concerns of just the regular workers and people. And trade unions are really going to grow at this time. And they're going to get some interesting rights. And one of the rights that they're actually going to be able to get legally is going to be the right to strike. And that is absolutely crucial, the fact that they will be allowed to go and strike, because, of course, the biggest power a labor union has is to shut down production. And so if you can do that, that is astounding. And for instance, by 1900, over 2 million workers will actually be in British unions, and by World War I, they'll have 3 and 4 million. Now, granted, that's only a little less than 20% of all British workers, but over time, this is what you need to do. You need to get more people involved, and unions will even get things like collective bargaining and stuff like that, okay? Now, some areas on the continent will lag behind, although places like France and Germany will catch up. But this is the idea, okay, of starting to work harder for better rights, better work conditions, all that type of stuff. France will start to see its unions. A bunch of socialist parties actually and unions exist, but they're not going to work together very much. But in 1895, they formed their first national union called the General Confederation of Labor. The biggest unions in the country what's the word I'm looking for? The biggest unions in the country will not be part of it. However, it is the first national union, and this is going to be really crucial for the development of unions, okay? And even though the biggest ones aren't in it, you get a bunch of small unions together. That is very, very helpful, and we are starting to see the growth of these unions. In Germany, workers will really start to become involved in political parties, okay? The first one will be formed in the late 1860s, and in 1889, it's in Germany that unions get the right to collectively bargain. And for those of you that do not know what that means they actually get to negotiate their own contracts. And that is incredibly important, and that is one of the most important rights that any union can actually get. Okay, and they'll also have the right to strike, but it is going to be a very political thing, and particularly in socialist political parties, 85% of unions were connected to some type of socialist party. So, not surprisingly, we're going to see the growth of that political philosophy at this time as well. And thus, we will see socialism expand. Germany is the place where socialism is going to go from this, what's the word I want to look for? To go from this utopia idea of these outside societies to now it's going to be an actual political movement to get federal governments involved with socialist practices. The big guys in the front of this were Wilhelm Liebknecht and August Bebel. They will actually create the Social Democratic Workers' Party in Saxony in Germany in 1869. Okay, and this will be a very large political party, many people will get involved and get elected to the Reichstag, which is the German parliament. Okay, overall, their goal is to fight for legislation to improve work conditions and wages and really everything for the working class. That is specifically who they're aimed at. And by 1912, it says 21 on here. I was wrong. It's 1912. They will actually become the largest political party in Germany. And so that's pretty impressive. Okay, and I'm going to leave the error because, again, this is real time. No need to edit. All right, now in France, you will also see the development of socialism, and that is going to be led by a man by the name of Jean Jaurès. Now, he was inspired by the French Revolution and the ideas within the French Revolution of equality and fraternity and things like that. He wanted France to become more unified, but also more equal, if you will. And as a result, you will start to get the Socialist Party grow in not only France, but we'll see it spread outside into the continent. Places like Belgium, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland, Romania, and the Netherlands. Even Russia will have one in 1898. They'll have a role later. Jaurès is going to be really important in trying to prevent World War I. He was also a devout pacifist, and we'll talk about the role of pacifism in trying to stem the tide of World War I. We know obviously it doesn't happen, but you will really get the development of just this growing socialism and government taking care of people. That's what it's all about. And as a result, you actually get the creation of the Second International. Okay, this is a loose confederation of socialist parties that basically would work together to try to get social programs and things like that passed within their own countries. This picture here is of a variety of people that were there. Note, you at least have one woman. This is actually two women here. This is pretty significant. This Socialist Party tended to be a little bit more open toward women than we had seen in the past, so that was cool. And what they will start to advocate will be using strikes and demonstrations by laborers to help support the political activities of the Socialist Party. And typically, a lot of those would often be surrounding on May Day, May 1st. This was basically commemorative. This happened, the use of striking on May Day was due to the Haymarket affair, or the Haymarket strike, or the Haymarket riot, however you ask, which occurred in Chicago. Okay, and at the Haymarket Square in Chicago, there's a huge labor demonstration. Bombs were set off, probably by anarchists, who I'll talk about in a second. There was also shooting between police and others. When it all was said and done, 7 police were killed and 4 civilians were killed. 8 people were arrested, 7 people sentenced to death. I think in the end only 5 were actually, the death sentence was carried out, but there were issues with the trial. And what Haymarket became was kind of like this call for labor to rise up and use the power of the worker to try to get political rights. Now, a lot of times, though, with socialism and the idea behind socialism, or that was calling, were these huge strikes and people trying to overthrow governments or upend, or the only way to actually have this work was to upend capitalism. And a guy by the name of Edward Bernstein comes in, and he writes this book called Evolutionary Socialism, which is a change in some things. And basically here he's like, look, capitalism has not completely broken down. In fact, it's rolling, and you don't necessarily see that there will be any slowing down of it. However, the middle class is actually expanding, and the group that Marx referred to as the proletariat isn't sinking. And in fact, for many of these groups, your living conditions and your standard of living is getting better. Now, it doesn't mean that it's still great. There's lots of abuses taking on. And so what he feels is that in order to take advantage, workers must organize into political parties and unions to work together to bring about change. Okay. Now, the right to vote is actually the key one that you would fight, because if you get the right to vote or universal male suffrage, there are so many workers compared to, top-notch wealthy people, that they have an enormous power in the process. Now, and this is how you're actually going to get change done. You're going to use the political process in democracy, okay, in voting and calling for voting, to get more of an opportunity for workers. And then you get laws that are geared toward workers. What he also saw is one of the issues that was developing was that, you know, Marx and Engels basically wanted this kind of worldwide revolt and all the workers of the world unite. And the fact of the matter is that people really weren't doing that. It was really hard to get some German worker to care about a British worker. That just really wasn't going to happen. And as a result, evolutionary socialism will start to have some more success. And as we go on, we'll talk about actual, socialism that does exist in Europe, from things like, universal healthcare, and do certain Scandinavian areas where education is free, for all, based on taxes. And it's going to be pretty powerful. But then we have anarchism, and this group just doesn't like any of it. So early anarchism, okay, we're not blowing stuff up yet. The core idea of anarchism is this, okay? True freedom is achieved by abolishing the state and social institutions. This doesn't mean that it has to be violent. This doesn't mean that you have to kill people. This doesn't mean that you don't recognize that people are gifted. The early movements of anarchism were actually nonviolent protests that deep down inside, they believed that people were good and that we have to get rid of the state as it stood so that people can work together better. That's the core kind of outside idea. Now, in order for that to work, you really do need to kind of, in some ways, upend the social order. So even though the early movement was calling for nonviolence and stuff like that, like it just, well, it doesn't happen. And as we often see, the more time goes by and you don't have change, people get upset, and then they start to get violent. That comes into the anarchism that most of you are probably more familiar with. And that was really inspired by a Russian by the name of Michael Bakunin. Okay, and this was popular in places like Spain, Portugal, as well as Russia, and in many other places around the world. And so these guys are going to be more about violence. And Bakunin basically stated that if you have small groups of well-trained fighters, that you can do so much violence that you could actually cause the state to collapse and social order to disappear. So the idea is that you must cause violence. Now, we know in the long run that this really doesn't work, and this isn't the way to do it. But nonetheless, that is what anarchists of this grain, not all grains, are going to go with. And they're going to do a lot of damage, particularly in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Okay, in 1893, the Liceu Opera House in Barcelona, a bomb is detonated. 20 people are killed, 52 people are injured. You can see just the devastation that is done here. And again, a lot of these attacks are aimed at civilians, so you could call these guys terrorists as well. In the United States, on June 2nd, 1919, you had bombings go on what seemed to be everywhere. Boston, New York, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Paterson, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia. Probably the biggest one was on Wall Street in New York. This is a picture of that. So that is devastating. And then you get a series of assassinations of leaders, okay? French President Sadi Carnot is assassinated. That's followed by King Umberto I of France. Then you had Empress Elizabeth of Austria-Hungary, followed by William McKinley in the United States. And then also in the 1880s, Alexander II of Russia, all executed or assassinated by anarchists. But in the end, the anarchists really don't get what they want, and they actually cause kind of the opposite. They cause nations to crack down on dissidents. They cause nations to reduce possible freedoms, like in places like Russia, because they feel that by giving people more freedom, this is what you get. And so in the end, this actually works against what the anarchists were trying to do. And you get some crazy times going on. All right, guys, make sure you review this again, and I will see you soon.